Ever put together, like, furniture or something, and the instructions are so bad you're like, did they even try to use words? Oof. That, my friends, is the pain of bad documentation. And in the software world, it's not just annoying, it can be a recipe for disaster. Today, we're diving into some, shall we say, vintage coding wisdom with documentation_7.txt. Seems to be about PowerBASIC, of all things. Now, even if you're not a coding historian like myself, stick around, because the stuff this source talks about, it's universal. Like right out the gate, they nail the programmer's dilemma. Code cool stuff now, or write the boring docs that'll save you later.
It's the eternal struggle, right? Short-term gain versus long-term sanity.
Right. It's like you can almost hear the developers in the room be like, nah, we'll document it later.
Classic. And then later never comes, the project gets handed off, and suddenly you've got a code base that looks like it was written in hieroglyphics. Nobody knows how anything works. Bugs are multiplying like rabbits. It's a nightmare.
You're not kidding. It's like, imagine building a house without blueprints. Then, 5 years later, trying to renovate.
Chaos. Absolute chaos. That's what happens when you skimp on documentation. It's about building for the future, not just for the right now.
Okay, so point-taken documentation, super important. But this documentation_7.txt, it doesn't just tell you to do it. It breaks down all these different types. We've got code-based, code-adjacent, external. They even have web-based.
A lot of people think documentation is just writing a manual, but it's so much more than that. Each of those types has its own role to play.
So walk me through it. What's code-based documentation? Is that like comments within the code itself?
You got it. Think of it like labeling the ingredients in your spice rack. You can just have a bunch of unlabeled jars, but good luck finding the oregano when you need it.
Ouch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been there, tried that, ended up with cumin in my cookies.
Exactly. But with clear labels, or in this case, well-named variables, descriptive function names, you know exactly what you're looking at. It makes the code so much easier to understand and maintain.
So future you, well, thank you.
Future you and anyone else who has to work with your code down the line.
Makes sense. Okay, so then what's this code adjacent category? Is that where those helpful comments come in?
You nailed it. Code adjacent documentation is all about those little notes you leave for yourself and others, explaining not just what the code is doing, but why.
It's like leaving a note on your fridge that says, don't eat this, it's for science.
Exactly. Except in this case, it's more like, this function does X because of Y, and if you change it, Z might break.
Helpful. Those comments can be lifesavers when you're trying to debug something or understand why a piece of code was written a certain way. All right, so those are the little notes within the code. What about the bigger picture stuff, this external documentation they mentioned?
Now we're talking blueprints. This is where you document the whole system, how it all fits together.
So like, if code-based is labeling your spice jars, external is the diagram of how your kitchen's laid out.
Love the analogy. You'd have your flowcharts, architectural diagrams, API documentation, stuff that helps you understand how the different parts of the software interact.
Makes sense, because even with perfectly labeled spices, if your kitchen's a disaster, good luck finding anything.
Exactly. And this is crucial not just for the developers, but for project managers, testers, anyone who needs to understand the system as a whole.
Okay, and then there's web-based documentation. I'm guessing this one's pretty straightforward. It's online.
You got it. Your help centers, FAQs, tutorials, anything you can access with a web browser.
Which, honestly, in this day and age, is how most of us find information anyway. Easier to Google something than to dig through a dusty manual.
Exactly. Accessibility is key. But here's where this source gets really interesting. They're big on documenting before you write any code at all.
Really? That seems counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want to figure out the code first before you start documenting it?
You'd think so, right? But imagine building something complex, say, a bridge without a plan. You'd waste so much time and resources trying to make things fit.
Yikes. Not a bridge I'd want to drive over.
Exactly. So planning your documentation is like creating that blueprint. It helps you see the big picture, avoid those costly mistakes later on.
Interesting. And this knowledge-based builder thing they mentioned, that fits into this planning phase.
It does. It's a mind mapping tool, basically a visual way to brainstorm, organize your ideas, spot potential problems early on.
Mind mapping, I've used that for creative stuff, but never thought about it for software development.
It's surprisingly powerful. You create this visual map of your software, its features, how everything connects, helps to get everyone on the same page right from the start.
So it's not just about documenting the code itself, it's about documenting the thinking behind it.
Absolutely. The decisions, the rationale, the why behind the what. That shared understanding is invaluable as the project evolves.
It strikes me that this whole documentation thing, it's not just about avoiding technical debt, is it? There's a human side to this too. This documentation 7.txt is very focused on the technical how-to, but good documentation, it's also about communication, right?
100%. I mean, think about it. Clear communication, it's the foundation of any successful team, and good documentation is like the ultimate form of that. It reduces those misunderstandings, helps everyone stay on the same page.
It's like you're being considerate of your teammates, of your future self even. Here are the breadcrumbs I left you, you're welcome.
Right. Instead of good luck figuring out this mess, suckers.
Exactly. And this isn't just about software either. This applies to like everything. Building something, planning an event, even writing up instructions for, I don't know.
That infamous furniture you were assembling earlier?
Exactly. Good documentation can mean the difference between a fun project and a week-long headache.
No doubt about it.
So I guess the takeaway here is documentation might not be the most glamorous part of the process, but
It's the key to a smoother, saner, more collaborative experience for everyone.
couldn't have said it better myself.
Ah.
Well, on that note, listeners, we want to hear from you. What are your documentation horror stories? Or maybe you've got a tale of how good documentation saved the day. We'd love to hear your stories. And until next time, happy documenting.